Coming up next on Arizona Horizons Journalists Roundtable, a Maricopa County judge holds the Arizona Department of Child Safety in contempt, and a $12 state minimum wage is closer to making the November ballot. The Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Horizons Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic, Howard Fisher of Capital Media Services, and Rachel Langang of the Arizona Capital Times. Maricopa County Juvenile Court Judge is holding the Arizona Department of Child Safety in contempt. Mary Jo, I want to get to this in a second because you wrote about this and it's very interesting. But considering what happened in Dallas last night, earlier this week in Tucson, City Council passed an interesting ordinance. What went on here?
Yes, this is gun related, and it says if you're going to have gun sales there, you cannot sell anything that has more than, I think, 10, would carry 10 rounds at a time. It's a gun control effort.
And this happened obviously earlier in the week, and this was for the Tucson Convention Center, I think,
Yes.
because that's where the gun shows are.
Exactly. You know, for years, that's where the most popular gun shows were, much in the same way they do them sometimes out at University of Phoenix Stadium or the Phoenix Convention Center. This has been an ongoing battle between the Tucson City Council and gun rights advocates. 3 years ago, they passed an ordinance saying, if you're going to do gun shows at the convention center, which we own, you have to do background checks, because there's, as you know, a quote-unquote loophole in the law. Well, what happened is, guess what? All the gun shows moved out, despite threats of lawsuits and everything else. So this new ordinance that Steve Kozachik pushed through is in some ways largely symbolic, since there are no gun shows there. They're being held in private venues up the block. But what's going to be interesting about this is we've had a law in the books for years about Tucson or specifically about preemptions. On August 8th, this new section comes into effect that says any lawmaker can complain to the AG about a preemption, and the AG can then withhold your state money. And we're going to have to see whether somebody like Senator Steve Smith complains to the AG and we end up with a new lawsuit over whether Tucson's efforts to control gun violence are illegal.
And Rachel, this is yet another case of the state saying, we're on top here, we decide.
Right, it's the more liberal cities that want to have stricter gun control, they want to have higher wages, they want to have these more progressive, more liberal ideas, and the state legislature, which is obviously conservative, has a problem with that. So they tend to try to tamp those down.
The term is Neanderthal.
Well,
you know.
I mean, this is all headed for legal action, you know, because many of these cities are charter cities. You know, they have the right to establish their own rules and sort of run things the way they want. So
how does that work, that charter city thing? How does that work? I mean,
Well,
This is fascinating. What happened is that, first of all, remember, many of these cities existed before the state existed in
Right.
1912. Arizona Constitution says if you adopt your own charter, and that requires a public vote, you may legislate on things of purely local control, regardless of what the legislature tells you. So, for example, when the legislature tried to tell Tucson you to have your elections on certain dates, State Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that because you're a charter city. Now, there are only 18 charter cities out of more than 90 cities, but it's this kind of thing that might make some communities say, you know, a charter is not such a bad thing.
yeah, no kidding. All right, so we'll see how that goes. Again, that's headed for court, just as sure as we're sitting here. We talked about D.C. and contempt of court. What's that all about?
Well, this stems from a case where a child has developmental disabilities. They got on DCS's radar screen, the family did, and the agency was ordering services. You know, let's get some counseling, let's get some therapy, and it just wasn't happening. It was not happening. The child was removed from the family. Actually, all the kids were removed for a while. And this all led to the mother complaining in court, and because this went on for many, many months, their attorneys sought a contempt finding, which is, I'm told, a lot of them will seek this if something gets blown off for a period of time, but very rarely do judges grant it, because usually, you know, a contempt finding comes with some kind of financial penalty, and sort of nobody wants to hurt the kids, right? They don't want to hurt the money that would go into the agency
Right,
to
I mean,
help.
financial penalty against the Department of Child Safety means that the Department of Child Safety doesn't have as much money, is it?
Exactly, but it gets their attention. And it gets the attention of the lawmakers who are appropriating the funds and saying, so when Greg McKay comes in and says, I need some more money, why
He's
do
the
you
chief
need more
of
money?
chief of DCS.
Yes.
Now,
So they did not get fined yet.
Yes. No.
They have to come up with a training program by November 1st that would allow caseworkers to quickly address people who need services. And if they don't do that, if that's not in place by November 1st, then they would have a $9,000 fine.
And not only do they have to have the policy in place, they have to have trained everybody, and they have to show that there's a follow-up plan. And I had one source who said it'd just be cheaper to pay the fine.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to. The agency has indicated that they were, they're aware of this. They're working on the training program.
So this is one case, Howie, and the entire agency is held in contempt?
Well, it comes down to where does the buck stop? And I think a lot of the frustration of juvenile court judges, and Mary Jo sees this a lot more than I do, is these are not unique cases, that there's been this history of excuses, I guess you could call them, of things that just don't get done. The excuses that were given to the legislature about why things didn't happen, how money got wasted. And I think you finally had a judge who said, I've had enough. And again, $9,000 is not a lot of money, but it's going to get their attention.
Is DCS, is it still considered an improvement over CPS? I mean,
Still considered?
well, well, I mean, initially it was considered an improvement because it was a change and they were moving forward. That's what we heard, Mary
Right,
Jo.
right.
So the question is it better than what we had?
Well, there are a few areas where I think that, they're improving. They're knocking down their backlog of cases, sort of this boat anchor that's sort of been dragging the agency down. But their most recent report on child welfare came out at the end of last month, and there's more kids in out-of-home care than there were the previous 6 months. Not by much, by up 1%, but still the trend lines haven't turned around yet.
Does that mean the governor has turned around with his thoughts on Greg McKay, the leader of DC?
Every time we've asked the governor, it's, great job here, Brownie. I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but the governor has shown no indication of wanting to get rid of Greg. And I think his question may be, okay, so we get rid of him, is it going to be any different? Now, one of the criticisms of Greg is he's a cop. He's not a welfare person. And the question is, do you need somebody running the agency whose background is something different?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Charles Flanagan, who was briefly his predecessor, he wasn't a cop, but he came out of a prison background. And he wasn't a social worker either. It seems that what that agency needs is a good administrator. And as for the governor, I think, this is a big agency. It's got a lot of problems. It takes time to turn things around. He's got his lean government, transformation people in there working on improving processes and all of that sort of bureaucratic machinery that could make things, work more efficiently.
But this case really speaks to the frustration that parents and families have to go through when this happens. Like, obviously the kids got pulled out of the home because there was some sort of deficiency, and the agency didn't remedy that problem. The kid didn't get services within a certain amount of time, and that leads to more problems for the kids. And that's really what the crux of the issue is.
All right, we've got a possible minimum wage initiative headed to the ballot. Signatures are in, Howie.
Signatures are in. They got 120,000 more than the 150,000 they need, which suggests that absent some horrible thing happening, the voters are going to get to decide. Do we want to raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour as of January 1 and $12 an hour by 2020? Right now, it's an $8.05 an hour, and that's based on the fact that in 2006, voters approved the first minimum wage ordinance, which separated us from the federal government. Feds are at $7.25. There's automatic inflation, but we'd be nowhere near $12 an hour by 2020 under that. There's a groundswell of support that's occurred on this thing. They got a lot of signatures in a very short period of time. You've seen what's happening in other states. California governor signed a $15 an hour measure. And there's one going on in Flagstaff for a local minimum wage and time off. And there are a lot of people saying, look, given the cost of living, can you live on $12 an hour? Can you live on $8 an hour, better yet? And so I think the group felt $12 was at least a saleable measure, and they think they've got a good chance.
Especially if stepped at $10 first and then step up to $12 later. Reaction from those against this, I would imagine, pretty strong.
Right, so the Restaurant Association, as you can imagine, they have a lot of lower wage workers, not a fan, and likely to fight it. The Arizona Chamber of Commerce, definitely not a fan, definitely going to fight it. You'll see a lot of heavy hitters going against this. So
And I will say for the restaurants, the ballot measure does sort of have a concession for tip workers, and it would raise their base pay to $9 an
Yes,
hour,
yes.
Ultimately, as opposed to the $12.
But that's pretty. The Chamber of Commerce, restaurant industry, those are pretty heavy hitters there.
Yeah,
That's,
they were out there last time.
yeah.
Well, but they may be busy with another ballot measure. Funny thing about that. The Service Employees International Union, which has been fighting with hospitals in California, decided to put a measure on the Arizona ballot that says hospital executives can't make more than $450,000 a year. The idea being, look, many of these are organized as charities. They get half the money from Medicare and Medicaid. And so, does it make sense to do this? Now, what's fascinating is that the very same Chamber of Commerce that said $12 an hour, oh, that's just way too much. When I asked them about their position on this measure, they said, well, $450,000 a year is about $216 an hour, and we certainly wouldn't want to cap that.
Yeah, and I do want to get more to the hospital executive pay cut in a second here. But as far as the minimum wage in the ballot, does this have a chance to pass?
Well, it gathered a lot of signatures in a relatively short amount of time, which shows, I think, that the public has a lot of interest in this. It's certainly been a popular progressive idea nationally, as you mentioned. It depends a lot on who turns out on Election Day. And with Trump on the ballot, as we've all talked about many times on the show, we don't really know what's going to happen.
It's a complete wild card,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes, although you could argue that many of the Trump supporters are people who probably would like to see a hike in the minimum wage because they're disaffected with some of the economic policies in the U.S. and their inability to move up. Also, I think this thing is just written to try to bring out the Latino vote in Arizona. I mean, this was, the minimum wage campaign. The director came out of Lucha. There's a lot of Hispanic support for this. Whether this brings those voters out, that a lot of Latinos some of them tend to be in the lower tier of hourly pay. This could drive them to the polls in an important presidential year.
And the economic aspect of that you mentioned, you can't underestimate, because you've had people like Dennis Hoffman on the show. And one of the things we've seen is that while the unemployment rate is going down, wages have been stagnant, except at the very top.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of thing that gets people angry. They say, look, it's about time.
Yeah, all right. It's about time for us to have our annual, it seems like, talk about marijuana with our chief expert over here, the self-anointed expert. Marijuana legalization now, is this on the ballot, headed for the ballot, going to make the ballot?
Well, again, they turned in far more signatures than they needed. We can expect that there'll be challenges. Somebody will say, well, the margins weren't quite right or something else. But here again, the business community is going to come out and say, look, you're failing to understand the problems that are occurring elsewhere. Well, that's in the eye of the beholder. I've been to Colorado a couple of times since they've enacted their laws. I've looked at it. They do have dispensaries all around the city, but somehow the state is still functioning.
And let's talk about this measure now. Legalizes pot for recreation use. Adults 21 and over could possess up to an ounce. You can also grow 6 plants in your home. I don't know, garden spot in your backyard, I don't know. It sets up a network of licensed cannabis shops, creates a department that will actually look at this, a department of marijuana control, something along these lines?
Right. Instead of being under DHS, like the medical marijuana program is, it would set up a separate group that would have oversight just over the marijuana.
Yeah. There are two weaknesses to this that are going to be the things that people like Bill Montgomery are shooting at. Number one is the people who have the current medical marijuana dispensaries get first crack at the limited, like 150 dispensaries that will be set up statewide. So you're creating an oligopoly of sorts that for the entire state you can only have 150 marijuana shops till 2020. The other interesting issue deals with the issue of driving drugged. The law does say you cannot drive while impaired, but there is no impaired standard in there. It's not like drunk driving. You hit .08, you're presumed impaired.
Does the fact that there would be a 15% tax on retail sales and it was supposed to go to education and public health, all these sorts of things, is that enough to woo some folks who might be on the fence for this?
Oh, I think definitely. I mean, one of the messages that we heard from Prop 123 2 months ago, was that for the people that voted no, they said this doesn't go far enough. And even the people that voted for it, some of them were saying, but we still need to do more for education. We need more for education. I mean, you always hold up education as the blessed child that needs, more help. But yeah, I think this could bring people out. People are rather attuned to our state's lean budget, and there's a significant cohort that thinks the state doesn't have enough money to do the job it's got to do. Here's a way to do it without, raising my income tax or the sales tax unless you're a marijuana user.
So let's listen. Let's get to list some of the arguments now here for and against the measure. It sounds like those who are for it say you take it out of the underground, you tax it, all these sorts of things. That's the positive
Right.
side.
They also had a campaign that was Buy American, not Mexican, and with a lot of drugs coming over the border. Basically, they're saying that prohibition hasn't worked. Why don't we regulate this and treat it like we treat alcohol? And it can't be worse than it is now. The failed war on drugs, a lot of citing of failed policies of the past few decades. Interestingly, a lot of people who are pro-legalization are not pro this initiative. There's a whole group of folks who think it doesn't go far enough. They think it's still prohibition in some regards. So you'll see people who are pro-legalization who are actually against this.
Are they against it enough to not go to the polls?
Or to go and vote no.
Yeah.
And that goes to the issue of the monopolies and the things. One of the other differences between this group's initiative and the one that failed is the other group would have decriminalized larger quantities, whereas this one, you still have some felonies available. So this is going to parse out, as Rachel said, some very interesting ways here in terms of where you're going to have folks on both ends who may oppose the middle.
And as far as those who are opposed to it, they say, you'll see more impaired drivers, you'll lose loved ones, more lost loved ones to impaired drivers. Businesses would be hurt because workers would be showing up high on the job.
But again,
these are the arguments against.
But you're still down to the question of the same arguments were raised with medical marijuana, that people would be showing up stoned. This has the same language as the medical marijuana law in the sense that you cannot bring your drugs to work, you cannot show up impaired, but by the contrary, you cannot be fired simply because you have the metabolites in your body because you got high on Saturday night and you show up on Monday. Metabolites will still show up in your bloodstream, but you're not high.
Before we leave this, for those who say, hey, marijuana is against the law, it's a federal law, it's against the law. So we pass a state law and we say it's okay. What happened to preemption in this situation?
Well, it's always fascinating that you have people like Bill Montgomery and some other county attorneys who say, we have a sovereign state. We get to decide. We made the federal government. Except when it comes to marijuana, of course, and we have to obey them. Look, the fact is, at least this administration has said, hands off. If states want to do it, nobody's running into Colorado. The FBI, the DEA is not running into Colorado and busting up marijuana shops.
There's also there's 4 states now that have legalized marijuana, and there'll probably be about 5, maybe I would guess, that'll have it on the ballot too. And as that begins to shift to majority states, I think you see some movement federally.
Okay, Harry mentioned this earlier, the hospital executive pay cut, this idea to the ballot. This would basically say you can't make more than the President of the United States?
Yeah, they plucked a number, a nice hefty number to say, why should anybody be earning more than the president, who technically earns, I think, $400,000 plus $50,000 for expenses. So that would be the cap for hospital executives. And this comes out of spills over from a fight from California that happened last cycle, I believe, it's playing out here in Arizona with some of the same hospital entities.
So this one is quite bizarre, because you mentioned the California union fight, and I actually haven't been able to find anybody in Arizona who's working on this. All of their circulators were, their petition circulators were local people, but their company was from California. All the representatives are in California. We don't have very strong unions here, so I don't think they're trying to organize at the hospitals. It's just a little bizarre. I don't see what the point is, aside from the spillover from California. Locally, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in it.
So finally, we're attracting some California business.
There you go. Yeah, like everyone says. So basically, when opponents say these are California unions coming over here and messing with our laws or out-of-state interests, they're right.
Well, they're right, but then again, the Marijuana Policy Project that put the 2010 measure on the ballot is based back east. Take a look at how much money has been spent on measures, ballot measures like payday loans and everything else. As Rachel mentioned, this one's a little funny because they tried to put it on the ballot in California in 2014, and then the hospitals and the unions entered into an agreement, say, we'll work on things. That fell apart. They tried to put it on this year, but a mediator said, well, wait a second, you were still under the terms of your 2014 agreement, and you have to pull that off the ballot. So that left them with, hey, we've got Arizona.
Hey, we got Arizona, but is it legal in Arizona? Is this legal?
I would anticipate that groups like the Hospital Association will challenge that and definitely bring up that idea. They're saying that because hospitals are licensed by the state, that you could tie this into their licensure. So if they didn't abide by these wage laws within their license would be revoked. That's what their justification is.
It's not good. Look, the fact is you cannot set wage caps like this for private enterprises. Now, the way you get it, what they should have done is say, look, these are nonprofit hospitals. They're getting tax breaks. If you pay more than a certain amount for a quote-unquote charity, then you lose the tax break. That's the way to get their attention.
All right, we'll see how far this one goes. Mary Jo, I know that we were looking for a slogan here, a rebranding or a branding. I think the governor, I can't remember if he wanted a rebranding or a branding for Arizona to get us to be more attractive to business and more attractive to people. And what? Have we got anything yet?
No, and I don't. Apparently, from reporting that Howie did, we're not going to. But this launched more than a year ago. You know, as the governor, and he is trying to sort of change the way Arizona's perceived on the national stage. And they hired the same firm that worked on rebranding Cold Stone Creamery, which back in the day the governor used to run. They did focus groups. They talked to lawmakers. They talked to average Joes, and to get people's ideas on, well, how is Arizona? How should it present itself? And Howie can probably speak better than I as to why they concluded that we really don't need a slogan.
Well, what's fascinating is everyone's been trying to sell Arizona as, you look in the business magazines, we have low taxes, we have people willing to work for next to nothing, we have less regulation. And that will get people's attention, but what Kathy Hearns found is that that gets people in the door. It doesn't close the deal. What closes the deal?
Who's Kathy Hearns, by the way?
She is the consultant that was hired.
Okay.
And she said what closes the deal is the lifestyle. The fact you can get home in 20 minutes. The fact that you can sit on your back porch, not today, but much of the year, and watch the sunset. The fact that it's kind of a laid-back place. She compared it to, you go out and you need a car. And yeah, you start with your head. Okay, it gets great gas mileage. It's a great value. And I think I'm getting a good trade-in. But what sells you on it is the car is gorgeous.
Right. You come here and for spring training and you say, yes. I could stay here. Exactly. I could start a business here. Could you start a business here? Is this really what business?
I mean, the thing that's interesting is this idea of the Arizona lifestyle. I mean, I read that and I'm like, well, what is that? I mean, it's very nebulous. And if you're supposed to come up with a slogan based on people like the Arizona lifestyle, I mean, I don't get what that is. And I think it's a little unclear. And especially if we're paying, $250,000 for a study like this, I don't understand what's the deliverable at the end of this. Like, what are they going to tell us? Are they going to tell us people like the lifestyle? I mean,
what's
there's
the
still nothing coming out of it.
Give me a catchphrase.
I want a catchphrase.
But I think that's the point. You cannot reduce it to that. I think you'll start seeing some new ads being put out that might say, yes, we have low taxes, yes, we have this, but we also have beautiful sunsets or something like that. And I think it's refocusing the idea of how to get things. I saw an article done by the two men who started the Tuft and Needle.
Yeah.
And they were in Palo Alto, and they said what brought them here was the lifestyle, the fact that they could be home in 15 minutes.
Was that Robert Pala's New Time story on them?
Yeah.
It was very interesting. So what our catchphrase is, we don't need no stinking catchphrase?
I guess, one of my colleagues went out and just randomly interviewed people at the airport. So a lot of them were travelers. And the one I really liked was a young woman suggested, Arizona will surprise you. And I think that
that's a good
plays
catchphrase.
Right into, there's all these preconceptions of Arizona, and you come here and you're like, wow, or, hey, it's really not so wacky, or you come here and say, oh my God, I didn't know 118 could feel like this.
So she got that for free at the airport.
Right, right. All right, so basically no catchphrase for now, but we love living here, and right about now, we have the coldest air conditioning in the country. Is that the idea?
Well, hopefully we do. As I say, we're going to see a final program probably by the end of the summer, and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like compared to what's been sold before.
All right, good stuff. Good to have you all here. Thanks. Monday on Arizona Horizon, our favorite physicist Lawrence Krauss joins us for a lively discussion of the latest science news. And our favorite humorist, Lori Notaro, talks about her latest ruminations on the domestic arts. That's Monday at 5:30 and 10 on the next Arizona Horizon. Tuesday, a debate. We'll hear from candidates running for Congressional District 1. Wednesday, hear about a new poll on border issues conducted by ASU's Cronkite School. Thursday, we take a legal look at national political conventions. And Friday, it's another edition of the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.